That's the same one I hear every time.
PTSD.
Trust.
Oh, I haven't. Let's make a stop. All right, just a second here. We'll get everybody seated.
Turn off the reverb. You might try to use your microphone rather than that helps.
Do what? Yeah, I have to turn mine on. I think it gets me. Is that better? Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the first steering committee meeting of the Urban Growth Boundary Amendment for the City of Sisters. It's an exciting moment. Took a lot of work and effort to get to this point, but we're glad that you guys are all joining us here today and that you agreed to step up and participate on this committee. Scott Woodford, Community Development Director, if, in case you didn't know, City of Sisters. So kind of the staff lead for the city, but there's also quite a few other folks in the city that are helping out with this process and supporting this process, as well as some consultants who I'll introduce here in a few minutes. But like I said, just thank you for stepping forward. We think we have a great, diverse committee to help advise the city on this important process for the community. We had really good number of applicants apply for this, and we had to make some really tough decisions. And somehow we were only looking to get 6 at large, but we had so many good ones, we decided to add a couple more. And it was a tough process, but we think that we struck the right balance on the committee. And as part of this process, we wanted to really ensure that this committee represented sisters and sisters country for that matter. That we had folks that had been here for a long time and folks that maybe have just gotten here in the last couple of years. Got a diversity of age. And we've got a diversity, I think, of opinions on growth. I think growth is a big issue, and we've all got our opinions on it. And I think we did our best to try to make sure all those opinions were represented on this committee. And we're really looking forward to having some really great discussions going forward. Public engagement is obviously a major component of our process. When we first started contemplating going forward with this, the city council was pretty adamant that we just go above and beyond what's normally associated or required for community engagement, knowing that Sisters is an engaged community and cares a lot. So that's a priority that we've been putting on this process. And one of the biggest tools for how we do that engagement is this steering committee. And so you guys are going to play an important role in terms of giving us the feedback that we need, giving us being the sounding board on these programs and policies and proposals that we put in front of you to really know that we're hitting the mark with the community. You know, in the growth management law that guides a lot of what we do, and in Oregon, public engagement is the #1 goal of that process. And so that's why we're putting a priority on this. And I think public engagement is going to be the cornerstone of this process as well. We do have a lot of other public engagement tools that we have planned that we'll go into some detail on. So there's not only getting you guys engaged, but getting the community at large engaged through open houses, surveys. We're going to start doing some tabling at community events. We have a variety of ways that we hope to get that input. We do have a prescriptive process that we have to follow. As you guys know, the state of Oregon has a growth management law that dictates much of what we do and how we do it. So while we're surely able to take all thoughts and all opinions, you know, not all of those may always be relevant or feasible through this process, as we know. But you know, despite that, we'll make every effort to let you know maybe why a comment can't be incorporated or where it may run afoul of the requirements of the state process. There's a lot to learn, a lot to know. We've already fed you guys a lot of information, and we don't expect you to know it all right away, but we're here to help out with that. And staff, myself, consultants, we're all here to help you guys better understand some of this stuff that we put forward to you. And so don't ever hesitate to reach out to us if you have questions on the process. I've already had one member reach out with quite a few questions, which are great questions. If you can get them to us a little, earlier in the after you've gotten the packet, give us a few days to help review those. We can have answers to you before the meeting, but don't hesitate to reach out. So as part of this introduction process, wanted to make sure that you guys all knew who you're in the room with. We know who you guys are, but you guys may not know each other. So I wanted to first start by introducing our staff members here that are here in support, and majority of them are sitting behind you there. I'm starting with the city manager, Jordan Wheeler, behind you. Jordan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Paul Bertagna, who's our Public Works Director. Public Works, obviously, the manager of all of our city streets and utilities, water, wastewater, and many things more. So he's here to help support questions that come up about infrastructure and how it supports, how we're planning to support future growth. And then Matt Martin, he's the principal planner with the Community Development Department, and so he's here. Rebecca Green is our city recorder, and she's helping support this process as well. And then we have our consultant team on board. We typically, it's pretty typical with these processes, no matter where you are, no matter how big your staff is, to have a consultant help you out with the process, because they can bring in their expertise that they have from doing these processes all over the state. So they've seen all the issues come forward, and they have the experience to be able to respond to those, and just the bandwidth that they bring in terms of producing information and helping the staff out. This is a group called MIG, is the name of their firm, and they've been in one form or another involved with city processes for about the last 5 or 6 years. So starting with the initial housing needs analysis, the comprehensive plan, the efficiency needs, efficiency measures. So they're well versed. The council and the planning commission are very familiar with them, and you guys will become very familiar with them here too. So they're here to support us. They work in conjunction with staff. They're working at the city's direction. Obviously, we're utilizing them for their expertise, but we kind of work hand in hand, and they're kind of an extension of staff. The folks that are the project managers for that team are Matt Hasty, the project manager, and Andrew Parrish. They also have some other staff that help them out. Would also take this opportunity to give you guys about 30 seconds, can't get off you too much more, to introduce yourself and maybe just a little bit about who you are, anything else you want to share, and maybe just a short kind of reason why you want to be on the committee, on the committee. It's a committee. So please keep it brief, because we got a big agenda here and we're trying to keep it down to 2 hours. So John, if you wouldn't mind starting out, just a brief intro.
You press and hold the
And
button with bring the light on. There you go. Each one.
We're up and running.
Testing.
And here's a note to everybody. Please speak directly into the microphone, because the folks on Zoom really get frustrated when you don't.
Okay.
You can bend it up, John.
Yeah, I'm John Tehan. I'm sisters, 39 years, owned property that's in our study area. Had a business, commercial business, downtown restaurant for 30 years. And I'm interested in the process. Would like to see, controlled positive growth. And, I've been on a couple committees over the years, the Vision Action Team, and I was on the wastewater committee back in, I think that was 98. So I think
Thank you.
that's, yeah.
Hi, I'm Mel Peterson. I have been in Sisters for almost 20 years. I've had 4 children go through the school district here. I work for the district, school district as the administrative secretary for 11 years. And I work for the Roundhouse Foundation and their director of operations there. So I've served on several committees in the community with some of you sitting at this table. My background is, I came from a 3rd-generation farming, ranching family out of Idaho. My husband is a 4th-generation ranching family from Eastern Oregon. So, as far as with, farming and ranching, hopefully be able to bring a voice to the table with that.
Thanks, Mel.
Yeah, I'm Gary Ross. I'm the alternate city councilor on this group. We have 2 councilors assigned. Uh, Councilor Jennifer Letts would normally be sitting in this chair, but she had an out-of-town commitment prior to the scheduling of this meeting. I will normally be on Zoom, so I can catch up with what's going on, because we can't have 3 councilors in the room together because it constitutes a formal meeting. So I guess that's about it. I'm just my 4th year on city council.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Ian Reed. I'm the district ranger here for the Sisters Ranger District for the U.S. Forest Service, and I think I'm an ex officio. What am I? What am I?
You are an official member,
I'm an official now.
un-
Okay.
unfortunately for you.
All right. Apparently, that's why I'm at the table with a little yellow card.
Congrats.
So representing, I guess, forestry interests. Yeah. So and I live in Sisters Country outside the current and maybe proposed UGB. We'll see where it ends up. So.
Thank you, Ian. Bill.
My name is Bill Willits, and it's a pleasure to be here with everybody. Our family owns Five Pine Lodge and Conference Center, and I am the managing partner of Mackenzie Meadow Village LLC. And that is a property development business. And I have one commercial. 20 years ago, we tried to alleviate root cause of poverty, talked about high cost of living. And at some point, I think this 15-minute video will be amazing to see where the citizens were at 20 years ago and how successful we weren't.
Hi, I'm Dr. Anna Rasmussen. I have called Sisters home for the last 20 years. I graduated from the high school. I'm a computational microbiologist and just moved back, bought a house in town in a few years ago. And I was on the Civic Leadership Academy, and this is my first board, so I'm really excited to be involved.
Yeah, welcome.
I'm Therese Kohler, and I'm on the Urban Forestry Board in Sisters. And I'm especially interested in promoting bigger and better Arbor Days and heritage trees. Also, I work with Sisters Community Leadership Initiative, SCLI, which you may or may not have heard of. We pick up trash in the Deschutes National Forest every week from the unhoused and work closely actually with the Forest Service in doing so. I live actually on the border right now near the airport in Grand Peaks. So my backyard is the current boundary and the city limits. So I'm interested in all that goes on in Sisters, but particularly how we grow and how we make room for people to come here and also businesses to thrive here.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Metolius. My wife and I are renters here in town. We rent a house that used to be John T. Hand's driveway in a previous time. This is the first time I've ever been on a committee, but I'm really looking forward to the process and getting to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Abi. I've been in Sisters since the beginning of 2021. My wife is Laura Elise, who was born, brought up in Sisters. So our family has been in this area for a pretty long time. We have a 4-year-old. I joined the UGB because I'm interested in how Sisters grows in a sustainable, equitable way. My career is in tech, and I've worked on like product inclusion, DEI type programs in the past.
Welcome.
My name is Morgan Greenwood. My family and I moved here about 4 years ago. We have a upcoming sixth grader and an upcoming ninth grader. My degree is in land use planning, and so I have been a land use planner for small cities in the past, but I've been a housing and renters' rights advocate since long before that. I currently work for Central Oregon Builders Association, but the views represented here are my own.
Art Blumenkron, I'm on the Planning Commission, have been for a number of times. I've been here in Sister since 2015 and have developed 3 live-work buildings over where Pika Coffee is located in that area. And I live right outside of town. I'm very interested in the way we grow.
Rick Retzman. I am on the Planning Commission and I've been in Sisters for 8 years, but I'm a native Oregonian. I like to always throw that in there. And again, I'm interested in the way we grow, that we grow controlled and equitably and just, I love the city. I want to keep it that way.
Susan Hallenberg, are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, would
So
you like to take a
sorry I
few
couldn't be
seconds
there
to
today.
yourself?
You guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. Sorry I couldn't be there. I'm actually on vacation, but I'm Susan Hallenberg and I've been in Sisters for about 3 years. I live just kind of north of the current urban growth boundary, about a mile north of town. I have spent my career in real estate, mostly focused on multifamily, market rate and affordable. Moved here from Utah. I think in my interview, I kind of mentioned there was, real rampant growth in Utah and seeing, subdivisions pop up everywhere. And obviously want to make sure that doesn't happen to Sisters, want to make sure that it's controlled growth and as well as preserving, everything about Sisters that we all enjoy.
Thank you. Last but not least.
All right. My name is Michael Preeton. I'm the mayor. I think I know everybody here in the room now. I will just say that this is the Sisters Way, this outreach that we're doing that is not necessarily all part of the state plan, but we're going to do it the way we do it here in Sisters. And I am absolutely proud to work alongside each and every one of you. You guys are all here for a reason. And I think that there is a big picture here that we're all part of that is going to shape this community for the next 20 to 40 years. And I appreciate you being part of it. And I'm just absolutely blown away by the quality of people that are in this room. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Just before we get to the next step in the agenda, I just wanted to acknowledge a group of additional group of not committee members, but we're calling them ex officio committee members. They are largely made up of many of our agency partners that we work with quite often, including our new fire chief, Tony Pryor. Welcome. We also have Deschutes County. I'm not sure who's on the call right now because I can't, or on the Zoom, I can't see. Perhaps they're on the call, but the county folks have been invited because as we're talking about potentially expanding our boundaries, that means we're expanding out into county land. And so they need to stay involved and we want to utilize their expertise of the knowledge that they have of, risk constraints, zoning issues that we might need to be aware of as we go forward. We also have invited ODOT. They also obviously are a key partner in this process. The Department of Land Conservation and Development, which is the state department that oversees the growth management law. So we want to make sure that we're in lockstep with those guys because that group, the state department, is actually the body that would acknowledge whatever expansion map we put forward for acknowledgement. We don't want to get all the way through this process and find out that the state does not like what we're doing and we have to start all over. So we want to keep them apprised of the process. The school district, we've reached out to the superintendent. I'm not sure if he's on the call. We have Jennifer Holland. She's executive director of Sisters Parks and Recreation District. We have Kristen Rattleberger. I hope I pronounced that right. She's from Central Oregon Land Watch. I got it. Okay. And then we also have a COBA a member, a representative available as well. And I'm blanking on the name. Help me out, Morgan. Tim Knopf.
Yeah.
Knope. Okay, I'm gonna get that. I'm not gonna mess that up again. So what the role that this group plays is more like a technical advisory committee. They don't hold a seat at the table, obviously, and they're not a voting member of this committee, but obviously we're going to need their input along the way at various times. And so we may call on them if they're in the audience during the meeting for expert testimony or advice, or if they have input that they want to offer during the meeting, we're going to try to provide opportunities for that. And I just want to welcome members of the public who are here, who may not be associated with any of those groups. Welcome here. And just to note, if anybody from the public wants to speak, we do have some time allotted at the end of the meeting. And we do have a sign-up sheet over there, if you wouldn't mind, excuse me, filling out your name and then passing it to myself, I guess, initially, and we'll make sure that you get time to make comment later. Okay, well, I'm a little over time here, so I'm gonna have to maybe make up some time on the next agenda item, which is kind of what the roles and the responsibilities are of the committee. And I put this in the packet, so I don't think I need to really go through it completely, verbatim. But just wanted to hit some highlights. This committee was obviously established by a resolution by the council as an advisory body to the council. And so that's, if you have any questions about, details about what that group's responsibility is and some of the rules laid out with respect to that, you can consult that resolution. But basically your role is to help advise the city on this process, help with reviewing draft materials like the ones we gave you in the packet. And your role would kind of see it as the flow of information. Once we get going, the public will provide their input, and then the steering committee will kind of take some of that input and make their recommendations, and then that'll flow to the planning commission and then up to the council, as council being the final body, approving body of this process. So I just want to emphasize that everybody's an equal participant here. It doesn't matter how long you lived here, or you own land here or there, or your position is this or that. We're all equal partners, equal members of this process, and everybody's input counts the same. So we want to make sure that there's room for a good dialogue and that everybody has their opportunity to say what their thoughts are. We're trying to we'll eventually try to work on a consensus basis to see if we can get to a consensus on some items. I think that'll really come into play once we start looking at different scenarios for where expansion might take place. And if we can't get to it, that's fine too, but that's what we're going to strive for. Your responsibility is just to review the packet material that we gave you. Hopefully we give you enough time to review it and to soak it in and be prepared to provide input. Again, if you have any questions, we recommend that you ask. I mean, you can certainly ask them in the meeting if they come up during the meeting, but if you know of questions ahead of time, please send them to us and we'll work on getting those questions answered. And if you don't mind, the way you write them, make them in a format that we can share with the other committee members so that they have the benefit of the questions and the answers too. Try to let us know if you're not going to make the meeting so we can make sure that we have a quorum, and a quorum is just the majority of the steering committee. So when we send out that email that lets you know when the meeting is, if you can just let us know if you can't make that, that'd be great. We're going to try to nail down the next meeting a month in advance this time so that we can kind of come up with a meeting that works for everybody. And it's going to be a little challenging this time of year with vacations, but we're going to give it a try. What you're going to expect from the staff and the consultant are that we will try to facilitate a transparent, inclusive process, and that we give you the information well ahead of time, schedule meetings ahead of time, be here for questions. We do have a project website that is a great resource if you need information. And if you can't find it there, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. Be happy to help you out. And then provide opportunities for the public to provide input to this body as well. And then seek input when appropriate from ex officio members. be accessible and responsive to questions from the committee. And we need to elect a chair and a vice chair to help lead this committee. And what we're looking for out of that position is basically just someone to help kind of keep the meeting going per the agenda and getting us out of here at a reasonable time. So keep the meeting moving in a timely fashion. Help keep the discussion civil and respectful, and maybe step in when necessary to try to mitigate that. Help the committee get to a consensus at the appropriate times. Make sure everyone has the opportunity for input. Coordinate with staff on the agendas ahead of the meeting. So that's really what we're asking for. We're asking hopefully not somebody to step up. I don't think this is going to happen, but to use it as a position to kind of unduly influence the committee, or help, try to use it as an opportunity to, dominate the conversation. That's not what we want out of a chair and a vice chair. We prefer that the chair and the vice chair comes from the at-large group of the committee. So this is an appropriate time to say, is there anybody from that at-large group? And I guess it's the non-council, non-planning commission member, and non-landowner group, to see if anybody's willing to step up and be a chair for the committee, and also a vice chair. And the vice chair would only step in if the chair couldn't make the meeting. So is there anybody that might be willing to volunteer for that? Therese? Anybody else wanting to consider that, or consider themselves a vice chair, perhaps? Abby?
I'll go for it.
One of the two of you? Did you guys already decide? Okay. Abby, thank you for stepping up, and Therese, chair. So we appreciate that. We'll help kind of guide you on what those responsibilities are. Not as much responsibility right this second, but going forward, I think. So thank you for stepping up. I think that's it. And I'm only 2 minutes past, I think, our agenda timeframe. So at this point, are there any questions of anything that I offered here before we move on? Logistics wise, bathrooms are around the corner. We do have some snacks and drinks up behind the dais there if you need anything. But otherwise, if I've seen no more questions or comments, I'm just going to turn it over and introduce Matt Hasty, our project manager from MIG. And he's going to lead you through a kind of a presentation that will really be kind of a primer on what we're about to undertake. So Matt, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. And really, Scott said I'll lead you, but really Andrew and I will lead you. I often say we, and I usually mean Andrew because he's the one doing really more of the work than I am. But we'll kind of tag team the presentation. He'll do kind of the first part, and I'll do the middle part, and then he'll do the third part. So we will walk through that. I'll just say a couple of things as we get started. One, even though we're not there in person, really happy to be there with you, at least on the screen. And I'll echo what the mayor and Scott and others said. Just, the quality of you all as a group is awesome. And so we're really just happy to see that, happy to work with you. And, we do a lot of this work around the state. And so I will hesitate to say experts, but we're experienced in this field, but you all are the experts on sisters, and we recognize that. And so it's really important to have you all there. I mean, we have done work in sisters over the last number of years, and we feel like we know the community reasonably well, but we're not the ones that live there. We're not the ones that work there, our own property. And so it's really important to have you all here. So I just want to thank you all for spending your time with us throughout this process. So I would just say that as we get started. And then I think I'll also say that today we're going to be giving you a lot of information. We're not making like decisions or asking for you to make recommendations during today's meeting. We'd love to hear your questions, especially if what we're presenting is not clear, or you think, or just any questions you have or suggestions on sort of how we might present this in a better way as we're talking to other people in the community. I think that would be super helpful. If you have questions about some of the technical details, we're happy to try to answer those. We got a few in advance, and we'll try to answer those kind of as we go through the presentation. And I think what we'll probably do is we'll walk through a section of the presentation, and then we'll pause and see if you have any questions, comments, etc. If you have a question for clarification along the way, we said something and it really wasn't clear, or you just need more information on what you just saw on a slide to help move forward, raise your hands. You're very, very small on my screen right now. So I'll rely on Scott to kind of help us know who's got a question. And then Susan, I think, is the only one on Zoom. So she can raise her Zoom hand or her actual hand, and we ought to be able to see it. So we will pause at different points along the way. But if there's something where you have kind of a more burning question, just go ahead and ask us. But let us know you have a question, and we'll try to do that. So that's just what I'll say. We'll do our best. As Scott said, we want to reserve some time at the end if there's other folks not on the committee who have questions. So we're going to try to reserve, I think, at least 10 minutes for that, and then we'll see how many people have questions, and we'll have to play it by ear a little bit in terms of how much time we have for questions or comments for each person when we get to that point. So I'll just say that. So
hey, Matt, this is Mayor Prayton. I hate to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
I'd like to do a couple of things. I've been in a lot of big groups over the years now.
Yeah.
One, let's try and make this a little more fun if we can. Just cut a joke now and again, maybe a party bus reference or something like that. And I challenge all of us to do that, not just me or the city people. I think we can all make this a little bit of fun. And is another thing that I learned in large groups, if you have a question, just stand your card up. You don't have to do a lot of waiting. Just stand your name up. That way everybody will know you have a question. And even if he can't see it, one of us will try and get to you as soon as we can. Good idea, right? All right. Thanks, Matt. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love it. I do try to make jokes during meetings sometimes. They don't always, I don't always get the amount of laughter I think I should, but at least usually I get the occasional smile. So I try to make them at my own expense, but we'll see what I come up with today. So just really quickly, I'll talk about the agenda, and then we already covered items 1 and 2. So kind of finished that. Andrew is going to talk about planning for growth in Oregon cities, kind of a UGB 101. I'll talk a little bit about the next couple of items, kind of the planning processes the city has gone through that have led up to this point, and then a quick overview of the process we're going to be going through and the timeline. And then Andrew will cover the draft land need report, at a fairly high level. And then again, we'll reserve some time for public comment after that. So that's the agenda. And again, we'll kind of pause along the way, but as the mayor just said, I love the stand your card up on the table so we know you've got a question. That'll be great. So I will let Andrew go to the slide after that and get started.
All right, thank you, Matt, and thank you folks in the room there. We do intend to be in person for some number of these meetings, but this first one wasn't in the cards. So urban growth boundaries 101, every city in Oregon has an urban growth boundary. We're one of the few states that does this kind of thing. The idea of the urban growth boundary is to be large enough to accommodate 20 years of growth for new houses, new businesses, and other identified land needs. So more than just homes and jobs, but things like parks and schools and infrastructure, future roads, et cetera. The process to expand an urban growth boundary, sometimes it's called amending an urban growth boundary, is done in coordination between the city and the county, special districts like water districts, sewer districts, school districts, park districts. So it's a big collaborative effort. And once land is inside the urban growth boundary, it can be annexed into the city. That's a separate process that happens later on. Expanding the urban growth boundary doesn't automatically bring something into the city and let folks hook up to services, et cetera. So there's a multi-step process that the land goes through. What does the urban growth boundary do? Why do we have them? The intent is to limit disconnected and unplanned development, sometimes called sprawl. You're supposed to be thoughtful about where the cities expand and what happens there. A lot of this is intended to protect farms and forests because those are the things that we have in Oregon that we love. It provides certainty for property owners and for the community about where future growth is going to happen. And it requires thoughtful planning and balancing of different priorities. So the whole process is kind of set up to identify what's important and recognize that there are trade-offs, and have the city, through public bodies like this, help make that decision about what's most important, what the right balance ought to be. The steps in this process are generally as follows. The first step is to identify land needs. So that's, what does growth look like? How many new housing units are expected? How many new jobs are expected? What other land needs are there? And what is the amount of land left available in the current urban growth boundary that can meet those needs? And if there's a mismatch, then you might need to look outside the current urban growth boundary. The second step is to establish and analyze the study area. The state has a lot of requirements about how big that study area needs to be, what land can be included in it, and we'll get to that point. We'll kind of touch on that a little bit in this meeting, but that's a step that's coming a little bit later. The third step is to create and evaluate alternatives of expansion areas. So, if we grew over here, what would that mean for the city? If we grew over here, what would that mean for the city? And out of all of those discussions and analyses, we need to create a preferred alternative, and that gets adopted through city council and through the county. Subsequent to that, you can do additional planning for new growth areas, things like master plans, things like comprehensive plan updates for policies for those areas, things like looking at what kinds of transportation infrastructure might be needed in greater detail. So we're kind of at the 10,000 foot level. Once you know where you're going to grow, you can make new, very specific plans for those areas. And then subsequent to that, you have annexation and development. So property actually becoming part of the city, development applications going through the sort of typical process in the city. You have your zoning designation, you apply to build certain things, you get your building permit check, et cetera, et cetera. One of the kind of important things about how these decisions are made about where to grow, there's these things called the Goal 14 factors. So Goal 14 is the Oregon statewide planning Goal 14 about urbanization. And there are 4 factors that the city needs to make legal findings about for why this is good land to add to the urban growth boundary. And this slide kind of tries to depict that there are a lot of things that we talk about as community members, as sort of human beings, that like the things that we value in our communities, habitat protection, natural resources, housing affordability, having a complete neighborhood with lots of things you can walk to and do, view sheds, having a sense of place, having good infrastructure. Those kind of need to get filtered into these 4 factors. That's part of our work as consultants here, is just kind of make this happen. But those factors are efficient accommodation of identified land needs. So you make the case that these are the needs that need to be met. How does the land meet those needs? That's factor 1. The second factor is orderly and economic provision of public facilities and services. So you have to be able to serve this with urban utilities, urban roads, urban water, sewer, et cetera. Factor 3 is what's called a environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences analysis, or ESEE or EC analysis. And that is kind of a term of art where you do some weighing and balancing, because these are kind of 4 big buckets of important things. The environment, energy, the economy, social consequences. What are the effects of growing in this manner? Does the city feel comfortable with the way that those are weighed and balanced? And I feel like a lot of the input that is received through this process is probably going to wind up in that discussion. And then the fourth factor is compatibility with urban uses and nearby agricultural and forest uses, because a big part of the intent of this whole process is to protect farm and forest land. So it's is there an active farming operation? Are there a lot of smelly cows nearby? Is having a big subdivision next to those smelly cows a good idea, that's where you kind of have that discussion. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, you asked me to make jokes. That qualifies. And we can also do longer range planning. So urban and rural reserves are something you may have heard of. Those are kind of a 50-year plan for growth as opposed to the urban growth boundaries 20 years. This is to provide kind of additional certainty for properties to think about even farther afield in terms of what growth might happen to the community. You can have something that is expected to be active farm for 30, 40 years, but maybe 50 years down the road, that might become urban. And next time there's a need for an urban growth boundary expansion, this is the type of land that becomes the highest priority for inclusion under the Oregon regime. So if you establish these urban and rural reserves, urban reserves are the ones that you have to look at first to meet those land needs. So our kind of scope of work for this process is we're going to kind of see where we are in about a year. But if there's time and if there's budget, we'd like to do some initial planning for these future urban areas where it seems like the city is going to want to grow. What are the goals that we've heard from the community and from you all about what we want these neighborhoods to look like? How does that translate into comprehensive plan policies and designations? What is the mix of housing out there? What are some other land uses that might make sense? And we can do some additional coordination with the property owners and have some more kind of public process. So there might be things that we hear from you all and from the community that don't directly apply to a UGB decision, but those things can be turned into, you know, what do we want new neighborhoods to look like in the City of Sisters, and what are the important things to keep in mind. So that's where some of that might feed into. So we want to get folks to the project website where we have lots of information today, and we will keep adding information as things get prepared. So we have both the city's website, and we have what's called a story map. It's kind of a multimedia online presentation for this this kind of information, and we hope to update those after each kind of major deliverable for this project. We'll make an update to the story map. We have frequently asked questions there currently, like how is this growth forecasted? And that was a subject of some questions that we had from you all earlier, and we're going to touch on that a little bit more later. What happens if we don't expand the urban growth boundary? Who's involved? How's this work being paid for? Who's making these decisions, et cetera? So we just would direct folks in the community and you all to the project website to get some of that information. But as Scott said, he's happy to answer questions specifically and direct folks as needed. So I'm going to hand it over to Matt to talk a little bit about what we've been up to, or what the city's been up to for the last several years that has led us to this point.
Yeah, but first I just want to take a pause and just see if people have questions about any of what Andrew talked about in terms of sort of the framework we're working within. We will say a little bit more about some of the tasks as we move forward into this, but just any questions about that kind of overarching urban growth boundary planning framework that we just talked about. And we will talk about, as Andrew said, sort of the basis of population projections, because that was a question that we had. When we get to that a little later in the process, we'll talk about that. But and also we'll talk about some of the questions around land needs and our assumptions there. But yeah, anything from you all at this point?
I guess I have a pretty basic question in terms of like what annexation actually means. So the land around Sisters, presumably much of it is owned by private individuals or trusts or, you know, by the Forest Service. What does it mean for the city to annex land for growth? Like if somebody already owns it, like how does that help solve residential needs? Like is it always public lands that is acquired? Like there's just very fundamental just understanding of what that step is.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take a quick shot at that, and then we'll see if Andrew or Scott have something to add. So right now, the city limits and the urban growth boundary are essentially the same. You don't really have land that's left inside the urban growth boundary that's not also in the city. If you expand your urban growth boundary, that does not automatically, as Andrew said, bring land into the city limits. That land has to be annexed. Typically, and I mean almost every place I've worked in Oregon, annexations are essentially property owner initiated. So the city doesn't, in most cases, come along and sort of compel folks to annex their land into the city. Those actions and applications are initiated by a property owner who's interested in seeing that land get developed. Once that land gets brought into the city, then a zoning designation gets applied to it. As part of the urban growth boundary expansion process, typically comprehensive plan designation gets applied to property. So it says generally this area is going to be used for residential purposes or employment purposes. And there's an identified set of zoning designations that could apply to those areas, because we want to make sure that we bring in enough land to meet the different types of needs that Andrew will talk about a little later. So there's some sideboards put on that land as it's brought into the UGB, but when it's actually annexed, that's when zoning gets applied. And that's when the city typically is going to require that services be provided as a condition of development. So it's not generally that the city's going out there and annexing that land, but it's that property owners who own the land say, yes, I want to now be within the city limits because I expect to be using my, having my land developed in an urban way. And then that process requires, again, consistency with city policies related to kind of a whole host of things. And again, development that's consistent with the zoning designation gets applied at the time of annexation. So did that help? Was that what you were kind of looking for, or is there any more we need to say about that?
That's helpful for me. Thank you.
I want to add something onto that for the benefit of the folks in the room and maybe listening. For those landowners that are outside of the urban growth boundary currently, they're in the county, they pay county taxes and those things. Expansion of the UGB does not change any of that. They still will stay in the county tax logs and pay county taxes. It's only when land is annexed into the city that it becomes subject to city jurisdiction and taxing and those sorts of things. So it's important to understand that when you expand the UGB boundary, you do not change the relationship that the landowner has with the county or with whoever the taxing or agency might be.
Yeah, that's a really good clarification.
That is, when that area is in the urban growth boundary or in the county, but in the urban growth boundary, is that we may want to consider, how we facilitate future urbanization of those lands or preserve the ability to urbanize those lands. For instance, in Redmond, every property that's in the urban growth boundary but still in the county is zoned UH10, which stands for Urban Holding 10. That means the minimum lot size that you can subdivide it is 10 acres. So that's part of this process is making sure that when this area is in the county and the urban growth boundary, that it doesn't change so much that it becomes really hard to urbanize. Because if it's broken into smaller lots, that makes it really difficult for a developer to come in the future and buy up all those properties and urbanize it. So that's another factor to consider.
Yeah. And I would say I would echo all that and then just say, and I think it's implied that once the area is brought into the urban growth boundary, the expectation is that within the next 20 years, it's going to become urban. It's going to be developed kind of at that level. It doesn't force anybody to do that, but that's the expectation. You're not thinking of it any longer as, oh, it's just kind of rural land outside the urban growth boundary. Now it's in the urban growth boundary. It's intended for that purpose. But again, it doesn't compel somebody to move forward and develop it or even, request it to be annexed. But that's sort of the philosophy behind it, if that helps. All right. Any other questions on kind of that UGB 101 piece? All right. So I'm going to walk through a few slides to just talk about some of the planning that's predated the process we're in now, and that really forms the basis of all this. I won't read what's in the the bubbles all along the way because we've got slides for each one of them. But I'll talk about those and just kind of talk about the highlights of some of those. I think the first slide might be, well, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so the comprehensive plan was updated now about 3 years ago, I want to say. It feels like shorter than that, or maybe longer than that. But the city updated its comprehensive plan. That actually, one of the other bubbles in the last slide indicated that even before the comprehensive plan was updated, the city went through a process of updating what's called its housing needs analysis. And so that had been done already, but a comprehensive plan essentially is sort of the policy framework for the future of the city. So it identifies goals, policies, implementation strategies that describe how the city is going to operate, function, grow, develop over time. And this was a really intensive process, I will say, in the city. And Andrew and I were lucky enough to help with this process. We were actually with another consulting firm when we started on that process. And then we merged with, or really were acquired by, MIG. But that was a great process. And when Scott talked about sort of the partnership between our team and staff, that was, an awesome partnership. So that again provides this policy basis to think about growth, housing, jobs, the natural environment, parks and open space, transportation, public facilities. So it kind of gives you sort of the broad policy framework for how the city addresses all of those things in growth areas or just areas that are already in the city. Subsequent to that, the city worked on a couple of documents, both related to housing, but one specifically is a housing plan. It's an update of a document the city had prepared about 10 years previously. And so it looks at, what are the housing needs? What kinds of housing do people need? Are those needs being met or not in terms of types of housing, affordability of housing? And what are some of the strategies the city with partners can undertake to help better meet those needs? So it identified a variety of strategies. Some of these have to do with the city zoning ordinance or development code and what types of housings are allowed where and kind of at what intensity and what are some of the standards around development of that housing. Are any of those impediments or barriers, and what are the ways to reduce those barriers? It identified some financial incentives and funding strategies to help, particularly as it relates to producing housing that's affordable to people with lower or moderate income, because those are really hard types of housing to make work and be developed in a financially feasible way without some kind of assistance or support or intervention by a public agency. So that's always sort of an important emphasis of a plan like that. So it identified strategies towards that end. And a lot of that happens in partnership with local developers, nonprofits, property owners, and others. And so it identifies a number of strategies that are sort of along those lines. So it sort of provides another level of policy around housing in particular. And concurrently with that, and related to it to a degree, the city produced what was called a land use efficiency measures report and plan. And this is kind of a precursor and part of an urban growth boundary planning effort. This is something that any city, before they can propose an expansion to their urban growth boundary or an amendment, they need to first look at, hey, how can we use the land that we already have within the existing urban growth boundary? How can we use that more effectively and efficiently? And so that's what we did as part of this process, was to look at what are the different strategies to do that. And we looked at quite a few strategies. The state requires cities to, the word is consider these strategies. They don't have to implement every single thing. They might decide that, well, we thought about this, but we decided this strategy was not right for our community, but these other strategies are. And so the city considered a wide variety of strategies, and concurrent with that process, or at the end of that process, adopted a number of these strategies. And so some of the things that were adopted were increasing the allowable density, the number of housing units per acre that can be built in different zones. The city had some standards for what are called floor area ratio requirements. That's basically the floor, take the floor area of a building, all the floors of development, divide it by the size of the property. That's the floor area ratio. The city has other standards that kind of get at the same thing. So that was seen as, to kind of meet that standard, and all these other standards doesn't make sense. So eliminated that one. It expanded the types of housing allowed in the city's sort of primary residential zone, the R zone, allows more housing to be developed in the downtown commercial area. It reduced some permitting barriers in terms of the process that somebody needs to go through to get a development approved. The state has something called a clear and objective standards rule that says cities have to apply clear and objective standards to the development of housing. It can't be discretionary. And so that means both the standards and the processes can't be discretionary. You can have a discretionary path if somebody wants to go down that, but you can't have that be the main path. So that was something the city did there too. And then also consistent also with some state law, established some density bonuses for affordable housing developments that meet certain criteria. So those were all things that the city's already done in terms of addressing this requirement that they look at these different efficiency measures. So that's not to say that there aren't maybe more things the city could do, but it's taken a pretty detailed and, I will say, intensive look at that. And so we probably won't revisit that in a significant degree as part of this process, but because we sort of intentionally and purposely did that before we got into this urban growth boundary amendment process, so that we kind of have that step under our belts. So that was done and adopted just about, I think, about a year and a half ago. So those were sort of the precursor things that provide a lot of the foundational basis for the work we're doing now, particularly sort of the technical analysis and some of the policy basis, a lot of the policy basis as well. So maybe I'm just going to stop real quick, see if anybody has any questions about those things, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about community engagement goals and strategies we're going to use in this process. But anything about any of those efforts? I know that was a lot of information I just threw at you, and I talked fast, and sorry about that. But any questions on any of that before I talk a little bit about engagement?
Is anybody regretting their participation on this committee at this point? Okay, they're still here. Nobody's left, Matt.
All right, that's good. That's good. I mean, again, I haven't seen anybody get up and leave, so that's awesome. But I can't see their faces, so I can't see the grimacing that may be occurring as I'm talking. So hopefully there's not too much of that. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about community engagement or public engagement. First, just some of the goals that we have for this process, and then some of the strategies or tools that we're going to use to try to achieve the goals. And just see if you have thoughts about that. If there's anything you feel like we're missing, or gosh, you should really think about doing this in addition to all those other things. So I think in terms of the goals, one, we want to hear from as many people as we can during this process. I think, as Scott said, there may be some things where we really appreciate those comments, but they're related to like a technical requirement. We don't have a lot of wiggle room there. But there's going to be other things that we can do something about. Andrew talked about sort of balancing these different objectives and factors. And so we really need to know what's important to people. We talked about planning for future growth areas. I think some of the comments we hear, I hope, are going to help inform those efforts. So just hearing from as many people as we can is really important. I think for us, identifying how expansion will directly and indirectly affect folks, and particularly people who kind of have barriers to living in or working in the city of Sisters, or just kind of going through public processes like this. That's really important to us. Targeting some of our outreach efforts to folks who, historically the city hasn't seen participate at as high a level in these processes. So we need to think about how we reach younger households and families, as well as Latino residents or households, who we just maybe haven't heard from as much in past processes. And, you know, either because they have barriers in terms of language or just barriers in terms of time. I mean, everybody's out there living their lives, and it's hard to find ways to put time into processes like this. So that's important. And then just helping people understand the process we're going through and responding to questions and, you know, telling people how are we, you know, when we get comments from folks about certain things, like how is that going to get used in the process? How are we going to incorporate that into recommendations that we have? And again, it may not be the case every time, but wherever we can do that, we want to talk about that and be clear and transparent about that. So those are sort of our overarching goals in terms of how we work with the community. In terms of some of the specific activities or tools, Andrew already talked about the project website and the story map, and just the fact that we'll be updating those along the way. Hopefully you all have had a chance to just at least take a quick look at those. A lot of good information there. Scott talked about the importance of this group, and you all are a really important community sounding board for us, and we'll be asking you to weigh in on options and alternatives as we move forward. We're planning on, we couldn't get, you know, everybody in the city on the steering committee, and there's some folks out there that we're going to want to just have some one-on-one conversations with or small group meetings. So we want to be doing that. We'll be putting together some materials that city staff can use to go out and talk to organized groups who meet regularly, so everybody doesn't have to come to a meeting that we've scheduled to hear about this process or be able to ask questions or give us their comments. But we will have at least one meeting like that, a community open house. And as we get to that point in the process, we can talk about sort of the format of that meeting and what y'all think makes the most sense. We say open house, doesn't have to be an open house format. That will likely occur kind of when we're at the point of having identified some alternatives for expansion and be in the process of hearing from people about what they think about that and how to evaluate those. Online engagement, you know, in addition to the website and the story map, we expect to have probably at least one online survey for folks to respond to. We'll be providing briefings at the Planning Commission for the Planning Commission and Council. We've already done kind of an initial set of orientation briefings for them. And so sort of the typical order or flow will be, we'll talk to you all, the steering committee, get your opinions on things, get your guidance, and then we'll go to the Planning Commission and then the City Council and let them know where we are, what we've heard from you, and get their opinions and guidance as well. So that's kind of how that'll work. And then at the end of the process, as I think both Scott and Andrew mentioned earlier, the UGB amendment has to ultimately be adopted by the city and the county. So there will be a set of hearings with the city and the county. Those may be conducted as joint hearings. They often are, where you've got like both bodies, planning commissions at one hearing and both groups, councils or board of commissioners at a hearing. So that will happen essentially towards the end of the process. And then I think anything else we can do just to get out there and creatively hear from people and talk to people, particularly if we can go to where people are and not be making them come to us, you know, as often. That's definitely a goal in terms of the things we do to check in with people about the process. So we have actually a draft community engagement plan. Well, I don't know if it's, yeah, I'll call it draft because it's sort of a living document. You know, it's something that we put together at the front end of the process to guide these efforts, but it's not a thing that's set in stone. So if there's other ways for us to better communicate with people or better engage with people, then that's sort of a flexible document. But if you haven't had a chance to look at that, I would definitely look at that. And we tried to sort of, in that document, sort of strike a balance between, there's certain things or aspects of the project where we're more in a like educational or providing information role. And there's other parts of the process where we really, you know, want to hear people's values, opinions, recommendations, and kind of learn from all that. So I don't know if we got the balance exactly right, but we did our best. But always room for improvement on that, I would say. So again, I'm going to stop or pause and just see if y'all have any questions or comments or thoughts about engagement. Again, anything we've missed, anything else you think is important for us to be thinking about as we're out talking to folks in the community.
One thing I'll say, on behalf of council, we're looking for any creative ways that we can get the word out a little better. Uh, for equity, for any, any reason. We want to hear from as many people as possible. We want to know what the community thinks, top to bottom, side to side, in and out of the city limits. And it's why you're all are here. So I'm going to charge you a little bit with that and see if you can't come up with ideas and better ways to engage than we have historically, because historically, I think, we've been weak, but we're getting better. But at the same time, having this many people on a committee, this is the reason.
And I would add that it could be, you may live out in Sisters Country and then you may have a group of people that meet on a regular basis or somewhere. I grew up in Maine, it would be a Grange Hall or something like that, but that we might not be aware of, where you could provide us with an invitation to come to where people are comfortable being and asking questions rather than coming in this building, which can be a little intimidating to some and off-putting to some. I know that I'm looking at my friend over on the other side of the room, and I expect to be twisting someone's arm in SPRD to help us with some of that too, in a more neutral setting. So, but I want to echo what Michael has said, that the council is really invested in getting to where the people are that want to talk to us. It doesn't have to be in this room.
Any other thoughts from folks?
If there's coffee or beer, you never know.
And as long as there's not more than 3 of you from the council in the room.
Can we provide beer at, I guess we can go to places where beer is served and talk to people for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think I just want to add or emphasize something that a couple of people just said, which is that, and we might have talked about this in terms of your roles and responsibilities, but definitely we want you to be able to sort of feel comfortable being like ambassadors for this process to the community. And just, again, as somebody just said, like encourage your friends, neighbors, colleagues, any groups that you are a member of, to get engaged in the process, or let us know if we can come and talk to them. So yeah, I think that would be awesome. And we would definitely encourage that.
Matt, we got a question from our district ranger, Ian Reed.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt, just thinking of the small group meetings and where people feel comfortable, Kiwanis and Rotary might be good ideas to kind of socialize this a little bit. And then Therese, I know, is with the Sisters Community Leadership Initiative. I don't want to speak for your group, but that might be another one to kind of have this rolled out a little bit, this planning process. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, we're kind of putting together like a rolling list of groups we'd like to go talk to if they'd like to have us come talk to them, talk to each other. So that's awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Got another comment here.
I just wanted to emphasize, yes, that's a great idea. And there are so many groups in Sisters that meet regularly. If we are tasked with going out directly to them, I'm sure we could find several to meet up with.
Yeah, if you do know those, please let me know. We had a good list that we put together as part of the comprehensive plan, but I'm sure we're missing a number of them out there. So if you do know of groups that we should be looking to meet with, let me know.
Yeah, and I will say we did something similar to this as part of the comp plan process. And when I say we, I actually mean Scott and other staff. We help put together materials for them to use, and we'll do that as part of this process too. But I think in that process, we called it community conversations, and went out and talked to as many groups like that as we could. So we definitely want to do something similar here. So yeah, and I would say if any of you want to be the people that do the talking, I mean, I think we'd welcome that. We could give you information to help do that, or at least help kind of with facilitating the conversation when we're out talking to folks. I don't want to speak, I shouldn't say that without checking with Scott maybe, but I would think he would probably appreciate that. So anyway.
Well, that helps a lot and helps spread our reach as well. So we're making sure that we're getting out to as many places as possible. And it's a far more effective tool than having an open house at 4 o'clock at City Hall and then and we get like 5 people to come. We finally figured out that the best way to do this is to go to where the people are to get the feedback. Took us a while, but we figured it out.
And I'll just say kind of one more thing on on this topic and then see if there's other comments. But that is that, you know, if you're looking at the information that we're providing on the website or the story map, and there's stuff there that you think, I don't know if that's the best way to explain that, or that's not super clear, we would welcome your comments. We're trying to make information as clear and kind of accessible as we can, but it's tough because we're planners. So we often, you know, use plannerese and jargon, and we try to kind of reduce it. But any thoughts you have towards that end, like, you know, the suggestion box is always open for that. So I would encourage you to let us know if there's ways you think we can improve how we're saying what we're saying, particularly. All right.
Got another question here.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, a quick question. You know, I know that I get confused with all the different types of housing that we talk about. And if we can make sure we all understand middle housing, affordable housing, workforce housing. So what, you know, we just need to know, as if we're talking to people, how to define those different types.
Yeah, that is a great suggestion and comment. It makes me think that, you know, one thing that would be really helpful would be to have just like on the story map, for instance, or the website or some other place, just a little kind of almost like a glossary of terms or a little cheat sheet that says, hey, when we say these things, here's what we mean. And especially if for the housing types, if we could have images that show examples of those. And those were things that we did during some of those earlier processes that I talked about, the housing plan update and the efficiency measures. So we've already got some information and materials that we can repurpose towards that end. But I think that's a really good thought. And like you say, we use a lot of terms, and it's not always, you know, if we haven't defined them or I haven't helped define them, then they can be not as helpful. So yeah, I like that suggestion. All right. Anything else on this topic? And if not, I think I'm going to hand it back to Andrew for, oh no, one more from me, at least. So a lot of this we've already talked about, so I'm not going to kind of walk through this in much detail. I'll say a couple of things. But Andrew kind of walked through these steps earlier in the presentation that are outlined in this graphic. The thing I would just point out for us is that kind of our next step is establishing that study area and starting to analyze, well, really establishing the study area and analyzing the study area, not quite yet to identify expansion alternatives, but that's something we're working on now. And that will be the subject of the next meeting that we have with y'all. So that's sort of the next step in this process. And then the other thing I'll say just a little bit more about that last step, the additional area planning task. So as Andrew said, to some degree, that's going to depend on what we have done about a year from now. But there are some things that we've kind of committed to doing as part of that task. And one is to sort of describe a framework and a set of values and objectives for planning for future growth or expansion areas. So like for sure, sort of establish a framework and get you to help us with that. And then for at least one area, kind of initiate that planning process, start to do that planning for at least one area. We don't know at this point, right, if we're going to be looking at sort of one larger area or 2 or 3 discrete areas. So without knowing that, it's hard for us to sort of to scope that out or define it in more detail. But we did say, look, we're going to make sure that we establish a framework and get started on some initial work for planning for at least one of those potential expansion or growth areas. So I just did want to say that a little bit about that step in the process. And that would happen again after the adoption of an urban growth boundary amendment. So that's sort of towards the end, but we got a ways before we get to that point. And in terms of just sort of overall timeline, we're expecting planning to be sort of through that adoption process by kind of early fall next year, 2025, and then spend a number of months on that additional area planning task as well. And we'll see where we are at that point and how much of that work we can get done with sort of the resources that we've got set aside for this project. So I will just note that. And then let's see, what is that? All right, here's where Andrew gets to step back in. But any just quick questions on the on this piece in terms of the timeline?
All right, maybe before I jump in, do we have folks that want to have public comment, and if so, how much time ought we reserve at the end here?
Are there members of the public that think that they might be wanting to make some public comment? And we just want to make sure that we are reserving the proper amount of time for that. Anybody wishing to make comment? Just here to listen at this point. That's fine. Looks one person online would like to make comment. Okay, and you can always step up again towards the end if you change your mind. But it looks like we have one person that wants to make some comment at the end.
Okay. So I'm going to cover some of the information that was in the packet in the draft land need report. Some of this can be pretty technical. I'll try to keep it light. So let's start out with the first step, which is land need. The land need is basically the foundation of that is the projected population increase that is established by Portland State University's Population Research Center. Pretty much every city in the state needs to use their population projections. I think this is something that the state instituted to keep every jurisdiction from having their own separate population forecast. They use a variety of census information. I think they do a lot of their work at the county level and then assign growth to the communities in the county, the communities that are incorporated, that have their own urban growth boundaries, and also the communities that are kind of outside of urban growth boundaries. So the reports that they have on their website go into as much detail as they have about that. But what is interesting about Deschutes County and the City of Sisters is that if you look at this chart on the left, we're starting at 2022, which is the date of their last forecast. They do these kind of on a rolling basis, so they will update them every few years for counties throughout the state. If you start at 2022 and you look ahead, the City of Sisters has the highest growth rate in terms of percentage in Deschutes County. And you're starting from a fairly small base, but it's a really significant increase in population that they're forecasting, and that's based on kind of recent development that's occurred. That's based on what's happening in other communities throughout the county. But the numbers that we are required to use from the state are basically showing a 95% increase in population to 2043. So that's a significant, no doubt. And in terms of sort of absolute numbers and share of county population, this is what the table looks like in the Portland State University report. So as of 2022, we're at about 3,500 residents, 2047 at about 7,900. These forecasts go out to 2072. Who knows what happens at that point, but that's just their methodology. And you'll see on the right-hand side, the City of Sisters and all kind of urban communities in Deschutes County, they're increasing in terms of their share of county population. So the land that's outside of urban growth boundaries is expected to not grow so much, to be annexed into cities, and so sort of these rural communities are expected to make up less of a share as urban communities grow in the county. So in the City of Sisters, we've taken a look at the residential land supply. So this is land that is zoned for residential uses. That includes the R zone, residential, MFR, multifamily residential, a couple of specific subdivisions like Pine Meadow Village and Sun Ranch, so that they have their own zoning designations. There are some properties that have split zoning. I think that's the former Forest Service site. and the gray areas here are non-residential. When we do this kind of work, we look at what are called constraints to development. So that's floodplain, that's the airport zone, things that are not areas that won't be developed with future residential uses. So we discount that land. We don't assume that that's developable. We do what's called a buildable lands inventory. We've done a few iterations of this over the last couple of years because the pace of growth has been really extensive, really high in the City of Sisters. So the red properties, which are basically underneath those red hatches, those are totally constrained. Blue areas on this map are developed. Yellow areas are called partially vacant. That's basically a lot that's large enough to subdivide under current zoning. Maybe it has a home on it, but there's room left over for maybe another unit or two to occur. There's a couple of those properties in the city. And then green properties are vacant, and you'll notice a lot of blue. The City of Sisters is pretty well developed in terms of what we've called residential land. The kind of red outlines are properties that we know have recent or pending development activity. Just for the purposes of this analysis, we are using a start date from 2023 as our, that's when we did our forecast. That's when we got the data for the parcels that have been developed. And there's been development and subdivision since then. So you can see kind of where that's occurring. But for the purposes of kind of what counts as future development, what counts as existing development, we're considering those recent subdivisions as meeting future need. A lot of them don't have a building permit currently. A lot of them don't have a certificate of occupancy currently. But we kind of just have to pick a date because this is ongoing activity that lots of properties are undertaking currently. So in terms of overall residential land need and supply, so we have a total of about 77 and a half acres of net vacant residential land, and that includes the downtown commercial zone, which is a mixed use zone. So some of that is likely going to be residential, some of it is likely going to be commercial or some other use that doesn't provide residences. With each of these zoning designations, we make assumptions for what the future density is going to be. And these densities actually changed because of that efficiency measures work that we did a couple years ago, where we changed what it means to be in the R zone, what it means to be in the MFR zone. So what we assume for the density is kind of inclusive of that efficiency measures work that was done. So then we wind up with projected housing capacity. We make some adjustments for lots that we know have like they've had a pre-application conference or they have an approved development permit for something that's a little bit different from our typical assumption for that zone. So that's why the math doesn't exactly add up. But we're talking about about 77 acres of residential land that's available in the city currently. If you use these assumptions and what we know about future development plans, that comes to about capacity for about 1,200 units in the city currently. Switching over to the employment side, because we have to look at needs for residences as well as future employment. This is a map of the employment land in the city, and we've included kind of all of downtown commercial, even though some of the DC zone has the ability to build residences without a commercial component. A lot of it is mixed use in that it requires you to have a commercial, maybe ground floor, and then you can have residential above. But we've got the tourist commercial zone, we've got a light industrial zone, we've got the North Sisters Business Park zone, which allows for live work units. Basically, you can have some developments that have residences as part of it, but it's really more of an employment zone. And maybe just a quick note about that here. In some of these mixed use zones where residential uses are allowed, we don't typically assume that future residential units are going to be a big portion of those unless there's some kind of requirement in the zoning designation to do that. Because we don't want to underplan for residential need and because we know that there's a need for employment uses. Um, so I think we've generally not assumed much residential in any of the zones except for the DC, the downtown commercial zone, where there are some places where we have assumed these are going to be residential in the future. So just some of the minutia of the mixed use zones that we have there. And here's a similar map about the buildable lands inventory designation. So there's a fair amount more vacant uh, employment land in various designations in the city, and not very much partially vacant. Not sure what else to say here. There's a fair amount of land. You see the same kind of recent development activity and constraints on these maps. And in terms of total acres, we are talking about again about 77 acres that's unconstrained, so things that aren't under the airport overlay or they're not under the floodplains in all of the zoning designations here. So these are the supply kind of numbers. This is the land supply of the city, and we match those with the need, the demand side on in terms of the work that was done previously in terms of forecasting growth, forecasting employment needs. There are also other types of land need, and we've had conversations with folks who are at public works and other jurisdiction and other kind of bodies that have land need that we need to address as well. So for public facilities, we don't see a need for future water or wastewater facilities, and so there isn't an identified need for it, additional land for that. But we do account for stormwater, pump stations, some other kind of general infrastructure that's part of new neighborhoods. That's part of what's called a net to gross conversion that we do when we're looking at land for residences or employment land. So new transportation infrastructure, new stormwater, we generally assume about 25% of an acre of raw land is going to go to some other uses like that for infrastructure and things that don't directly translate into housing units or jobs. Parks and open space is another identified land need. So the City of Sisters recently increased it's called the level of service. So how much parkland does the city want to have per resident, basically? They've increased that to 5 acres per 1,000 residents. So when you do the math in terms of kind of population, that equals about 26 acres of additional land that the city needs based on their most recent Parks Master Plan. And given what the city currently owns and has, that's about 19 acres of land that's not currently met. So that is likely new parks in new urban areas, new parks in new neighborhoods that will help meet that need. Schools is another category. We had a discussion with the Sister School District superintendent. There's a potential need if you look at the very end of kind of this population forecast. There's a potential need for maybe another elementary school, and these sites are typically about 15 acres, and so we've added that to our list of potential future needs. We need to do additional coordination with Sister School District throughout this process. The map that you see here is land that's owned by the school district. They own some land outside the urban growth boundary. I'm pretty sure that all has a conservation easement on it. There's there's land where the existing schools are, but it wouldn't be ideal to have kind of a mega school structure with a new elementary school in addition to everything that's there currently. And so there may be a need for land for a new elementary school as part of an expansion. So overall, what does this all mean? What does this all mean? We've got this table here with a whole lot of footnotes and caveats and whatnot. But we're basically talking about north of 200 acres. These numbers are expected to change a little bit as we, maybe reevaluate some lands that are inside the urban growth boundary, as we look outside the urban growth boundary and say, this is a moderately subdivided kind of area. Maybe it doesn't totally develop at greenfield like densities. So there's a fair amount of wiggle room here. But we're talking about something like 170 acres for low density residential uses. That's mainly single family detached housing, some middle housing. There's a moderate surplus of land that the city has currently for high density residential uses. Part of that is because the city now allows more residential uses in the downtown commercial zone. But you don't really want to use all of that land for low density residential uses. That was actually a big part of the efficiency measures process that we undertook, because the city used to allow MFR, multifamily residential land, to be developed at kind of low single family density as those kinds of developments, and that wound up eating up a lot of that land, and so you don't have the land left to build apartments. So all of which is to say that surplus of high density residential land doesn't necessarily translate into, we can use that for low density residential land. Then we have our need for employment land and our need for schools and parks identified here. So those are the components of what we're talking about. We have some information there about that gross to net conversion. But again, like I said, when we're looking outside the urban growth boundary, there might be reasons why an acre of that land doesn't translate into an acre of needed land for the city. So these numbers are preliminary. They're subject to change. So I think that ends the technical discussion here. I will open it to questions or further clarifications from staff and Matt and others here, but thank you for your time.
Thanks, Andrew. This is Mayor Preeden. If you could go back one slide, Matt, if you're controlling that, to that overall land need versus supply. This is the rub right here. That's the number of acres that we're contemplating. As an example, where we're at right now, our city is 1.88 square miles of land. That equates to about 1,200 acres when you do the math, right around there. Could be off just a little bit. So we have 1,200 now. UGB is the exact same size as the city. So where is the land coming from and how much do we need? Well, we're kind of looking at, you kind of have to look at the gross acreage need because you need room for infrastructure on top of the zone land that we're considering, which includes parks, schools, and everything. So when you add the infrastructure, we're looking at 227 to 264. That means we have some hard decisions to make about growing the city about 1/6 to 1/5 the size more. So it's some serious contemplation we have going ahead of us here. And the most important thing is to make sure whatever we decide, we're making the right decision, that's best for the most people, I guess, is the way. I think there's no way to come up with a decision that everyone's going to be 100% happy with. I think that if you come into public service and expect that, good luck, but we're going to do the best we can. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks. I have a quick clarifying question. So if there was something like a hospital or an assisted living facility, would that be considered in the residential or employment lands? Because I know we have like schools and parks are separate. So I'm just curious where things like that would fall in this calculation.
I think that would be classified as employment land. For some reason, healthcare facilities are not treated quite the same as schools. But maybe Matt, you can respond, or Scott. I think in Redmond, similar question.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it. I will say that those things, in terms of a hospital, for instance, that wasn't sort of explicitly considered, and but we do consider like healthcare offices or clinics or things like that as part of that employment forecast. So at a sort of a smaller scale, yes. At a larger scale, if you are looking at planning for or needing a large hospital facility, that I think would represent an additional land need. I think when we worked on that employment opportunities analysis, that's sort of the underpinning of the employment land needs piece, the assumption was that you were not of a size where we would foresee you having a need for a major hospital facility within this community, and that things like, again, doctors' offices, smaller clinics, that is essentially built into that employment projection and the amount of land needed for it. So that's what I would say about hospitals generally. And then what I would say about, for instance, an assisted living center or something like that, I mean, we are forecasting the housing need based on those future population forecasts, and that does include, people in all age ranges. So we are assuming housing units for, for older folks, younger folks in general. We didn't explicitly sort of say, oh yeah, we need to assume X number of acres for a senior living facility or an assisted living facility. So it's sort of generally part of the assumed population increase. I will also say that when we're looking at that, we're not explicitly accounting for what's called group living facilities, and sometimes an assisted living facility might fall under that category. So it's a little squishy on that one. So I'd say the general answer is yes, except for the larger hospital facilities. They're kind of embedded in those future population and employment and associated land need analyses. So hopefully that helps. It's not a perfect answer, but that's how we think about it anyway.
I had a question around the school requirement. So you mentioned with the population doubling, another elementary school would be needed. What about middle schools and high schools? Like if the population is doubling, do we not feel that middle school, high school, because just looking at the map of how much of the city's acreage is existing schools, like wouldn't we expect with a population doubling or like that to grow up more? Like 15 acres feels very small if the population is doubling.
Yeah, so I'll take a shot at that and see if Scott or anybody has anything to add. So when the school district sort of thinks about a certain increase in population and the number of school-age children that are going to be kind of part of that population, and then how big their facilities are, how big they typically would build a middle school or a high school, the assumption is that that population increase doesn't sort of equate to enough new middle school students or enough high school students to build a new facility for middle schoolers or high schoolers. And the district does have a decent amount of land on their middle school and high school sites. So I think at least their initial assumption was that that amount of increase in population would not sort of trip the switch to need to build a new middle school or a new high school. But in terms of the number of school age kids who are in an elementary school, they looked at, okay, how large is the school? How large are those sites? Could they accommodate a whole new school on one of those sites? And their assumption is, again, based on proportion of elementary school age kids to the population and that population increase, they think when they get towards like the second half, not in the next 10 years necessarily, but in the next 10 to 20 years, that's probably, if some current assumptions and trends hold up, that's probably going to mean the need for another elementary school. Now, I will also note that they do have a piece of property that like technically might be large enough for an elementary school, but the shape of it doesn't work very well to actually build a school on. And so that property is probably not going to meet the needs for a new elementary school. hence the assumption that we should assume the need for a site big enough to accommodate an elementary school, and just sort of general planning purposes, that tends to look like about 15 acres. So even though that doesn't seem like a lot for sort of the amount of population increase that we're talking about, that was sort of the assumption for the school district. And the other thing for the school district is, you know, they're serving not just the city of Sisters, but the larger sister school district. And so they're also thinking about that too. They're not taking into account like just the city of Sisters population, but they're thinking about the district's population increase as a whole. And then the last thing I'll note is kind of, and Andrew talked about this too, that we may end up looking at some properties within the UGB as having the capacity for additional use or additional jobs or people, houses. That school district site could be one of them. And that's why this is sort of our best shot at these numbers now. They might change a little bit. They're going to change to some degree at the margins. We're not going to see a 200-acre swing here. So I don't think we're going to see a change in the overall need for an amendment to the UGB, but we might see a change in the size, you know, so I would just put that out there. You know, we've sort of done our best to get to this point, but it doesn't mean we have like all of it totally figured out. We might have some conversations during this process that kind of lead us to adjust some of these numbers one way or the other. So hopefully that helps. That was a lot of talking by me, but did that help with the question?
I think Ian, I think you had your card up first or next.
Hey, Matt, just kind of going back to the community engagement piece. I looked at the map there, and if I'm reading it correctly, I don't think Pole Creek Ranch is in the city limits currently. I don't know if that would be part of the proposal for the UGB expansion or not, but I know that ranch is co-owned now by the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Indians, and I'm just curious if anybody has included them in these conversations about UGB expansion.
I am gonna pump that to Scott.
We know that in addition, you know, not only do we need to do outreach to folks that live in the existing boundaries, but also those areas that are potentially in the study area. So other than just throwing it out to the larger community for the steering committee opportunity and making it clear that landowners could apply to beyond that, we haven't done the outreach out into to those areas yet. But it's a good point. It's not just city residents, it's those that are potentially in the boundary, and not only those, but those that could potentially on the periphery of the boundary. You know, they all have a stake in this. So I don't know if Councilor Ross or Morgan had him up first or not, but
I'll be quick. Just it's actually follow up to the school question. Having worked for almost 40 years in education, involved in the planning of 3 elementaries and 1 middle school in the same district, the ratio it doesn't work like we think it does. And typically in a large district, I know we're a small district, typically in a district where you have multiple schools, 3 or 4, sometimes 5 elementary schools feed a single middle school. Now, some of that's due to the fact of how big the middle school is, certainly, but some of it also is the fact that you see student population decrease from kindergarten forward. Some people take their children up to homeschool. Some people leave for employment purposes. And with the cost of housing as it is, when we look at our demographic in this community, we tend to have an older demographic, which indicates you're less likely to have young school-age children. So I think that with the school districts being smart and looking at it, but if I were to rub my crystal ball, unless we can figure out, which is something the city council is very interested in, how to get more affordable and workforce housing in this community, which is part of this discussion, an elementary school isn't going to be needed because we aren't going to have the people living here that will have elementary school aged children because they can't afford to.
Yeah, I'm actually just like tying into that. I'm kind of shocked by the high density residential having a surplus given the housing affordability challenges, especially planning forward 20 years. Like that's very, very surprising to me. Like we've had so many conversations in the city about having higher density housing. Is there really this much of a surplus?
Yeah, let me answer that if you don't mind. The answer is, no. Obviously, with the affordability issues that we're having in town, the housing shortage, I appreciate the numbers, being up there, but as a goal of city council and the community at large, I'm not saying we discount those numbers, but is it a negative number? I'd say probably not. There are, reasons that, Matt and, MIG put these numbers in here, but they're not, it's not chiseled in stone for sure. That's why you guys are here to help guide us through that. And I think we can figure out pretty clearly that we may be overbuilt on, multifamily homes for some communities, but I don't think we are for our own community. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, I would just add a couple quick things. One, just because the density of development of that kind of housing is so much higher, it takes less acres to accommodate, a certain number of housing units, and that's partly why you're seeing that. That's one item. And two, because we are assuming a certain amount of capacity within that downtown commercial zone for that kind of housing, that's the other reason you see that number. But because of what the mayor just said and what Andrew said, even though that looks like, there's a surplus, we would hesitate to sort of trade that surplus for other land or say it's really a surplus because it is sort of to some degree a precious commodity, as I think the city's seen over the last 20 years, and it won't in equal amount accommodate other forms of housing. So that's why when you see that range, the upper end of the range includes that stated surplus of high density housing or residential land. So I think, really good points. And the last thing I'll say is just kind of back to the school district comment. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree that could absolutely come to pass. At the same time, we don't want to not assume or include land for, let's say, a new elementary school in an expansion, and then find out we need one, find out, oh, there have been ways to sort of improve the affordability of housing, or that there are families who maybe live just outside the city who, need to have their kids in a school here. So, I think we're being conservative in that regard. I'm not disagreeing with the comments at all, just sort of saying in some cases we want to be conservative in our assumptions, and that's where a couple of these things come from. So, but totally appreciate the comments, and I can understand why the numbers might not seem to make sense in some ways.
I don't disagree with you at all. I just kind of wanted to point out that I think it's a good placeholder. And should we find when we get 15, 20, 30 years down the road that we do not need to build a school there may be some other type of public facility, or there may be more housing that needs to go into that spot. So I think it's a smart move to have that in reserve and know that we need to plan for it. I'm just saying that school planning is half voodoo and half reality, and sometimes you get one right and the other one wrong. I know from experience. So
And
Totally.
just real quick, it's 5% of the total. So if it's used for school, great. If we need more housing, 15, 20 years down the road, we can, the reason that Grand Peaks and Clear Pine exist is because we made some decisions a long time ago that we needed more housing than we needed light industrial. And, are we paying for it now? Maybe a little bit, but they're great neighborhoods. So they are what they are. And so we can change gears if we have to.
And just a
Morgan,
real
you've been very patiently. So it's your turn, and then we'll go to Mel.
Okay, I've been so patient. I'm going to ask 3 really quick questions, and I promise they're super fast. Matt, real quick, what is the assumed units per acre for low density residential?
So I'm going to punt that to Andrew because he's the numbers guy, because I think we've got that in one of these charts. There we go.
It's a combination of the R zone, SRR zone, and our PMV zone, but it's basically about 8 units an acre.
Okay, thank you. And then not to beat a fully dead horse too much, but the regarding your ratio for downtown commercial between housing and residential, are you assuming, if I say mixed use, I don't mean to imply that every single all new construction is going to be ground floor commercial and top 2 floors residential. But are you assuming kind of a 1/3 to 2/3 proportion there when you guys did that count?
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Andrew.
It really depends on the location. So there are some specific properties in the city where you are allowed to build residential only development, and that's what we've assumed there, and that's what has kind of been discussed on those parcels. And it has to do with an agreement that the city had with some subdivision a while ago. So it's kind of location specific, and for other properties, it is kind of assumed to be a ground floor commercial, maybe 1 story above that residential, because of the economics and the regulations that are on the books today.
Thank you. Okay, and last one. I'm going to put you in the incredibly uncomfortable position of speaking for not 1, but 2 separate taxing districts. I remember back in the old days, like maybe 18 whole months ago, there was some discussion that the school district would retain ownership of the old elementary school and lease it to the Parks District. So when we're talking about an additional elementary school, is the assumption that the Parks District will acquire the property that the existing old elementary school is on, or has a lot changed in 18 months and I've just been out of the loop?
I'll just say for our purposes, we're not assuming either residential or employment development on that property, but we know that there's been discussions.
Thank you.
Okay, we got about 10 minutes left, and we want to make sure you guys have opportunities for comment, but we want to reserve some opportunities for the members of the public that want to speak and get us out of here at the time that we said we were going to, but take it away, Mel.
Just real quick, I just on clarification on, I don't know what slide number it is for you, but I'm looking on page 10, the employment land supply. And looking at this, I just wanted, on the initials on the map, UAR, what does UAR stand for?
It
Urban
stands
Area
for
Reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Urban Area Reserve. Yeah, that's a really interesting designation. That is the kind of thing you might see for an urban growth boundary expansion area, a reserve for urban uses. But those properties have religious ownership currently, and so what happens on those properties is kind of constitutionally exempt as far as we're concerned, but it is of interest. So I don't know how much more I can say about that.
Okay, and the letter OS or letters OS.
Open space.
Open space, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody, any other final questions on the committee before we turn it over to the public? Let's see, who on the public I think we had one on Zoom or 2, at least 1 or 2 on Zoom. Matt, do we have anybody?
We have Peter Winch.
Peter, welcome. Would you we have about 10 minutes left, and we have if you can keep your comments to about 3 or 4 minutes, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you for initiating the process and doing such a nice job of, I think, creating a framework so that we make good decisions. I'm Peter Winch. My family owns a property at 857 South Pine Street. It's one of the vacant lands on the map. It might be helpful to show that again, show that the residential lands map that you had earlier. Yeah, we've been in Sisters, not residents, but frequent visitors for generations. And I, as a child, spent a lot of time at our cabin there, and now my nephews have had the same experience. And yeah, so very connected. Love Sisters. Love the setting, the way the town and the business community have grown and changed over time. Just the whole thing. Such a special place, and I'm excited and interested in being part of this look toward the future. We were similarly trying to follow and be involved in the comprehensive plan process a few years ago, and I agree. Seems like it was yesterday, and it was now what, 3 years ago. Yeah, so if you look at that map, our property is about 2.8 acres, and there's a neighboring property that's exactly the same size. They're down in the southwest corner within city limits, residentially zoned, and our property has a cabin. The neighboring property is vacant, truly vacant. And yeah, just, I guess, need to call attention to the fact that these are certainly and appropriately being, well, maybe appropriately being included in the buildable lands calculation. But that actually, in reality, a variety of decisions over a long period of time have caused these properties to actually not have access. So we are using an access easement which crosses the Sisters View subdivision from Pine Street. But the development of the Pine Meadow Village subdivision, unfortunately, and that was pre-annexation, but just pre-annexation to the City of Sisters, it kind of left a mess because it indeed created these streets that stub out to the south, which definitely show the intention of future expansion to create access to our properties. But at the same time, there was a sliver, a sort of a flag lot that is sort of an appendage to the agricultural property that surrounds us on the other sides, which was maintained, which actually precludes us from getting that access. The Sisters General Plan and the Transportation System Plan certainly affirm the purpose of those stub streets, which would be to extend and bring that connectivity into any future development that were to happen on our properties. But right now, we don't have access. So what I would like to, the idea that I would like to plant here is that the UGB process and whatever comes out of it, whatever level of expansion of the UGB comes out of this process, should be paired with resolution to our access issue. Because right now, we have a combined 5.6 acres of vacant residentially zoned land. And as you can see, there's actually not that much residential vacant land within city limits that is effectively undevelopable. And the state goals, which I think the Sisters General Comprehensive Plan and probably, hopefully, the sentiment, the spirit of this community about efficient use of land really, I think, calls on us to address that challenge. So I would ask this committee to take that into consideration. And that's
Thank you, Peter.
all I got. Thank you.
Are there any other folks on Zoom that would like to comment? And then we'll turn to the folks in the audience to see if they have any final takers on public comment.
I'd ask anyone online to raise your hand if you'd like to make additional comments. Seeing none.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Sign in sheet.
Okay.
Like comments.
Charlene, if you wouldn't mind coming up to the podium here.
Please turn on that microphone.
Okay. Thank you. I'm a tech genius. All right. Hi, everybody. Charlene Weed, 406 West Sisters View Place. In fact, the Winch's properties easement goes right behind my house. So it'd be great if you guys could figure out a way to get them access to their properties so that could get closed off, because that'd be nice to have a backyard. Okay. Anyway, I honestly think that would be a great idea to figure out how to get access to that 6 acres so it could be developed. But that's not what I came up here for. I just have a couple questions. One is I'm wondering about the airport. So when you look at the map, it seems to me that some of the most obvious places for us to expand are right next to that airport. So is the airport, are we going to always have the airport? Is it going to be right downtown someday? Or I don't know. I'm interested in that. Do you want me to ask my second question or wait? Yeah, go ahead. Okay. So the other question is about the way that things are zoned. Do we have a zoning for a manufactured home park or a trailer park? Because those are really fast ways to get some good affordable housing. And those are all my comments. Thank you.
So I'm not sure I can answer that question about the airport. I think it's a really good and fair question. For our purposes, the airport's there. There's an airport overlay zone, which regulates or limits development within that area. So that's why we're sort of considering that as a constrained area on the map. Beyond that, I might punt that to Scott, punting all the hard questions to Scott, or he can punt them to Matt Martin, even better if he wants. And then the question about manufactured home parks, I am trying to remember which zone, residential zone or zones those are allowed in. All cities have to allow those in at least one residential zone. And I cannot remember, I don't know that answer, but I can't remember which zone those would be allowed in. So I'm punting that one to Scott or Matt Martin too. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add on those.
Allowed in both the residential and the multifamily residential zone.
Okay.
Matt's giving me a head nod, so that makes me feel better.
And then the airport question, I don't know if you guys have anything to add on that.
Yeah. You want to talk about the airport? Or is there?
Airport is kind of before my time on council, but it's, the airport itself is already in the city. That was annexed in what, 2012, 2013. There is a lot of area adjacent to the airport that's developed and are within our consider, the zones that we're considering. And then there's a lot of, RR10, non-developed land that's been used for agriculture in the past. And, I think Mr. Tehan and some other families have had that land for a long time that is, in the exempted lands area that are being considered right now. So yeah, I don't know about the airport itself, other than it's already in. And, I think that's definitely an area we're all going to be looking at for sure. Well, I don't think the airport's going anywhere. That's up to the owner, right? So that's up to the owner. And I don't, I just don't have a feeling that it's going anywhere. So, but it's up to him, not to me. So.
Just in the interest of being thorough here, any final comments from anybody? Kristen.
I just wanted to share, I do think this is an informative piece, is that population projections are largely based on how we've grown in the past and the recent past, and that's based on Sisters proper, but also in the region. So when we go into this process, I think it's valuable to think about these numbers in terms of like how many housing units versus households. We have a really high vacancy rate here because of the second and third homes here. And I think going forward into this process, thinking about how we want to grow into the future and not necessarily base that on how we've been growing in the past. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, I think we're close to the 6 o'clock hour, and I think that that means that we are concluding the meeting, the first meeting. So again, just want to thank you all. Hopefully it was sorry. Oh, it's John. I didn't see out of my.
And Scott, do you want to talk about next meeting date? That would be maybe one last
One more
thing.
comment, Matt, that I didn't see from John.
Okay.
I think we need to be aware of when we not annex, but when we expand the UGB, and we need to be aware of not expanding it completely, because we end up changing zones within the existing UGB. And we've spent a lot of time and money to make a plan. And even though Clear Pine is a very nice subdivision, it did use up land that appears that we did a study for that said that we needed so many acres for a 20-year plan. And so now we turn that into a housing development, which it's a beautiful housing development, but where do we put the light industrial land that we need now. So do we develop housing, housing units or divisions and with multi industrial as well? Is that what we're looking at doing? And I think it's just something we have to be aware of. And because our expansion of industrial was so small in 2005, which I think it was really incomplete, that we go back and start to rezone properties that we had studied for. And according to this property that we needed. So anyway.
Yeah, I would say good food for thought as we move forward. And I was about to say, Scott, I think you maybe wanted to talk about, before we let everybody go, which we should do since it's 6:05, but talk about a date for the next meeting.
Yeah, so we actually have a quick turnaround for you for the next meeting. We're looking at the end of July to bring you the draft study map to consider. We're looking at July 25th. I think that's the Thursday. Let me confirm that. 27th. No, July 25th, Thursday, the same time. You don't have to decide right now. I think I'll just send out another poll via email to make sure that it's going to work for the vast majority of you, if not all. So give it some thought and look for an email from me on that. So thank you all for joining us today. Hope you found the conversation interesting and informative. And
Are you going to give us homework or what?
you get homework. The mayor.
How do we know what we're going to do next?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, we'll be sending out a packet of information. If that's what you're getting at, a week before the meeting to help prepare for that. So
In the other, I'll give you a little homework, since I hate to not give people homework when they ask for it, right? My homework would be, if you haven't already done it, take a look at the information on the website and on the story map, not just to like read it, but to look at it with sort of a critical eye. Again, if there's stuff there that you like think that doesn't make sense, or I don't understand that, or you could really explain that in a better way, or you're missing some topics or questions, I would encourage you to kind of do that and send comments about that to Scott. We had some couple of really good questions, for instance, that came up from the Planning Commission at their work session a couple of weeks ago, which we didn't have answers to, or at least not 100% confident answers to. And we got some answers. We're going to be putting that into the FAQs on the website, but that's my suggested homework. And then of course, read the packet when it comes to you and be ready to discuss that stuff at the next meeting. But yeah, I hate to have a request for homework go unanswered. So thank you.
all right. Thanks to the members of the public who showed up and our ex officio members who joined us as well. So have a good night, everyone.
And as far as finding that information, it is on the front page of the website. So when you look, there will be buttons, the UGB event, it'll take you right straight to it.
Yeah, and I'm going to suggest we'll put up the PSU population forecast for Deschutes County report too up there, because some people are kind of particularly interested in that. So I think we'll add that to the background information place. So yeah, thank you.